Hello, welcome. I'm Ashley Chesser with Wild Farm Alliance. Thanks for joining us today for the second Roll of Birds on Midwest Farms webinar. This is the second lesson of 10. I'm going to start by sharing just a little bit about Wild Farm Alliance. Since the year 2000, we've been working with farmers to achieve healthy, viable agriculture that protects and restores wild nature. So this is our 25th anniversary. And we have a 2050 vision in our three program areas. We aim to see 1 million nest boxes and perches on farms in our Farmland Flyways program, hedgerows of habitat the length of the moon and back, which is 500,000 miles approximately, in our Farmland Wildways program, and 10% of river frontage on farms planted as a farmland waterway, leading to 100,000 miles of riverine habitat. We're excited to announce a new publication on protecting birds in agricultural landscapes. Birds play a vital role in providing natural pest control and contributing to the overall resilience of farming and ranching systems. This publication highlights ways farmers can reduce risks to birds while maintaining productive working lands. In addition to this new publication, there's an array of publications and videos in our resources section on our website, including a publication on nesting structures for beneficial songbirds on Midwest farms and beneficial bird native plant chart for the upper Midwest. So check that out as well. Today's webinar is American Kestrels as Pest Control Allies on the Farm. Our speakers are Jeanette Kelly, Citizen Science and Outreach Director at Beaver Creek Reserve, and Catherine Lindell, Associate Professor from the Integrative Biology Department and Center for Global Change and Earth Observations at Michigan State University. Next month will be our third lesson on birds in the balance, pest control services across crop types on November 4th. So we hope you'll join for that one as well. And then we're offering one CCA credit from the American Society of Agronomy. So to receive credit, please have your license number handy and enter it in the evaluation form, which will be shared at the end of today's webinar. If you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, or if you're having any issues, technical issues, let us know in the chat as well, and we'll try to help. But that's it for now. I'm going to pass it over to Jeanette to get us started. Thank you, Jeanette.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. I have the pleasure of speaking about my absolute favorite bird. So this is the very first bird I ever worked with as a wildlife biologist, and it is a bird that I am fortunate enough to continue to work with. And so I love having the opportunity to speak about American kestrels. And today I'm going to talk about the role of nest box installation and monitoring. So American kestrels are one of our most common and widespread raptors, but their populations have been declining now for decades. And according to the North American Breeding Birds Survey, there has been an approximate 50% loss in their population since the mid 1960s. And although considered a relatively low conservation concern, if these trends continue, American kestrels will lose another 50% of their population by 2075. One of the main factors that influence the current decline of the population is the loss of nesting habitat. Kestrels are cavity nesters, and kestrels are losing their nesting cavities through the continued clearing of land and the felling of standing dead trees or snags. And these birds depend on for their nest sites. And many farming practices that include removing of hedgerows and islands of trees and lone trees in the middle of the fields are where kestrels like to nest. And so those are areas where they're losing their nesting habitats. We have learned that by substituting these natural cavities with man-made nest box, we can help to support American kestrels. So why nest boxes? As I said, kestrels are cavity nesters, and they are what we refer to as secondary cavity nesters. And what this means is they cannot create their own cavities for nesting. They are dependent upon naturally formed cavities in dead trees or an old fence post, or those that are created by other animals that have special adaptations to create such cavities, such as woodpeckers. So since these types of cavities are becoming harder to find and the competition for them is increasing, we can provide habitat for kestrels by hanging up nest boxes in appropriate habitats. So you can see in this slide here, kestrels utilizing a natural habitat, a cavity that's in a tree. This one looks like it was made by a woodpecker, or in a man-made structure, a nest box. So what type of habitat should we be looking for to hang up kestrel nest boxes? Kestrels like open country. They want to be in big expanses of open areas. They want to be able to see far distances and to soar in open areas. They want meadows, grasslands, prairies. They can also be very adaptable to humans, and they can be found nesting in urban areas, in urban green spaces, in parks. They can also be found in early successional old fields, in agricultural fields, and in pastures. And you can see that I have pasture in parentheses there, and we're going to talk a little bit more about pastures here in just a couple of minutes. So this picture here is a nest box that we have put up in a perfect location for an American kestrel. You can see that short vegetation, not a lot of medium-sized vegetation, and mostly open country. In this open country, we're looking for areas that are a minimum of an acre, hopefully larger if you have it, lots of short ground vegetation. They don't want a lot of trees. They need maybe one tree or just a few isolated trees scattered here and there. They want a tree to be able to perch on, to sit and wait for prey, or maybe utility lines. If you're near a road or some utility lines, those utility poles will work great as well. But as you can see in this picture, open areas, just a few trees or a few places to perch here and there is kind of the perfect and ideal habitat for kestrels. So where I work here at Beaver Creek Reserve, we have an American Kestrel Nest Box monitoring program that we do with our citizen scientists. And one thing that we have learned, and this is just our experience that we've had through the years, is that we have stopped putting up our nest boxes in pasture land or where there's livestock. And this is why I had pasture in parentheses. And this has just been our experience, but we have found that when we put nest boxes where there is livestock, it tends to increase our odds of our nests being taken over or invaded by starlings, European starlings. And so we see that competition increase when we are closer to livestock. So we have taken a firm stance on not breeding native species in our nest boxes. We feel it goes against our mission here at Beaver Creek Reserve. So we no longer put up nest boxes where there are cattle or pig farm, pigs or livestock actively in those areas. And we do find putting them further distances away work fine, but this picture here that you see, we have since moved that, that kestrel nest box because it just wasn't producing the way we wanted it to. We also know that you want to make sure that your nest box is far away from a woodlot, at least 50 yards. And you want to make sure if you're putting your nest box on a tree that there's not a lot of branches close to the nest box. You want to take away areas where other animals or other birds can perch or provide opportunities for other animals or potential predators to come near the kestrel nest box. So following some of these things will help you to improve the likelihood of having successful nesting opportunities for your kestrels. Ooh, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. So when do you want to install your nest boxes? Late fall or before March? We know that kestrels in this area start nesting mid-March, early April. So you want to make sure to have your nest box up before they come back to the area. You can mount kestrel nest boxes on a conduit pole, on a lone tree, on a 4x4 post, on the side of a barn, any place again where it's kind of by itself. There's not a lot of other perching opportunities. And you want to use a predator guard if you're going to be on a post or potentially a tree. You can put stove piping around that pole or a baffle like you would use for a bird feeder, but putting something like that will definitely help keeping predators away. Putting your nest box 10 to 30 feet up in the air can be helpful. Birds like it that high, and again, you're reducing the competition from other species and reducing the risk of predation. If you're putting up multiple nest boxes, you should place them a half mile apart from each other. And placing your nest boxes pointing to the south or southeast will also increase your likeliness of getting a kestrel into your nest box and decrease the competition with the species you're not looking to have. And don't be discouraged if a kestrel doesn't show up in your nest box right away, because it can take a couple years for a kestrel to find a nest box and move into it. Monitoring nest boxes is very important. The goal of putting up a nest box is that we want to help support kestrel populations. Also, if you're using it in a place of agriculture, you want to support those kestrel populations so you can help maybe keep down the potential pest species in your area. And unwanted guests like non-native species and predators can have a huge impact on kestrel nesting success. So by monitoring, you can help to mitigate the impact of those potential problem species. And you might find by monitoring your nest, you might find you have some unwanted guests. Now, if you end up having some species like tree swallows, bluebirds, chickadees, wrens, screech owls, those are what I like to refer to as acceptable tenants. They might not be what you were focusing on, but they are native species. They are species that are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And those are birds that you just look at and you're happy that you have there and you just leave them be. Unacceptable tenants that you do not want in your kestrel nest box are non-native invasive species like the European starling and the English house sparrow. Those birds will take over kestrel nests, they will kick the kestrels out, they will remove the eggs, and those are two species that are non-native. They're considered pest species, and you are free to remove them. There are no laws that are protecting them. So you can remove the eggs, you can remove the chicks, you can remove the birds. And so feel free to evict those two species at will. When you're monitoring nest boxes, you can also, part of the reason you're doing it is also for conservation and scientific purposes. When you are monitoring them, you're looking at things like looking at how many eggs are being laid, when those eggs are hatching, when your nesting might be occurring. You are looking to see when hatching is how many hatchlings are surviving. And by looking at all these things, you can observe population change over time. You might be able to see how population change is affected by climate change, habitat loss, urban expansion, and non-native species. And by monitoring nests long term, that long term data is invaluable. And by having that long term data, scientists are able to predict impacts on bird populations and help to determine the best conservation efforts to help protect species. And as someone who works in citizen science, I tend to think one of the most important ways to help support kestrels is by getting people involved and by having citizens involved with conservation. And I'm going to quote a fabulous scientist who recently just passed away, Dr. Jane Goodall, whom I have had this quote sitting on my desk since I started in wildlife biology. Only if we can, only if we understand can we care, only if we care we will help, and only if we help we shall be saved. And I firmly believe that in conservation, and especially when you engage the public into working with wildlife and into working with nature. If you are going to install kestrel nest boxes or any sort of nest box, I highly recommend that you follow a monitoring protocol. If you're going to help increase the success of your nest box. And there are two great monitoring protocols out there that I recommend. You can go to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to their Nest Watch site and look up their monitoring protocol. They also have nest box instructions for all kinds of cavity nesting species out there. And here in Wisconsin, the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance down in Madison, for kestrels, they also have a wonderful monitoring protocol on their website. So please check those out if you are going to be monitoring kestrel nest boxes. And I want to thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeanette. We are going to launch a poll to see if our audience was paying attention. There are no repercussions if you get these wrong, but we hope that you learned something. So we'll give you a minute here to fill out this poll, and then we'll turn it back to Jeanette to see how we did. All right. How'd we do, Jeanette?
Looks like we did quite well. People were awake and paying attention. I love it. So, yes, for question one, true or false, American kestrels do not use man-made structures such as fence posts, utility poles, parks, or agricultural fields. That question is false. So, excellent job. 97% got that correct. They do use man-made structures. We're talking about nest box for one, but yes, they will use fence posts, utility poles, parks. They do use a lot of man-made structures. Question two, which species nest can you legally remove from your kestrel nest box? And this one does often trip people up a little bit. So the correct answer is English house sparrows and European starlings. So 86% majority of you got that right. The one that does trip people up, and I see it tripped a few people up, is the one that included brown-headed cowbird. And the what confuses people about brown-headed cowbirds is they are a species of bird that is they parasitize. So they do go and drop their eggs in other birds' nests and then they leave. They do not raise their young, which we automatically assume to be something negative and we don't like. However, the brown-headed cowbird is a native species and they are protected. So you are not allowed to eradicate brown-headed cowbirds at will. They sometimes scientists during work do remove brown-headed cowbirds from other birds' nests, but that they have special permits and permission to be able to do that. And that's usually involving a threatened or endangered species. But the only two species in this list that the public are allowed to remove are the English house sparrow and the European starling. So great job.
All right. Thank you again so much, Jeanette. Always love hearing about American kestrels and how we can support them. So I'm going to pass it to Catherine to continue that discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's very nice to be here and to share our work from my lab the past 15 years or so. And I'll be talking about falcons helping fruit farmers, American kestrels as a pest management tool. And I just recently retired from Michigan State University, so I'm still affiliated. Hmm. Okay, and as has been mentioned, this is part of the series Birds as Pest Control Allies, this particular webinar within the series. I've done much of my work in Michigan fruit orchards. This is one of our cherry orchards in the spring, quite beautiful. But I've also been collaborating with people in other parts of the country who share some of the same issues we have in fruit production. So I am putting the learning objectives up here up front so that you can be aware of what you're going to be tested on at the end. So one, I'd like you to be aware that you should be able to identify two potential benefits of attracting natural predators to scare and or consume crop pests. So pay attention to that information as I go along. And also participants will be able to identify one challenge in attracting American kestrels to farms to aid in pest control. So we'll address these two issues. So we all know that birds can damage and cause yield loss in fruit crops. So grapes, apples, this is bird damage in both of those crops. Blueberries, birds can really be problematic. and also cherries. We've done a lot of work in sweet and tart cherries in Michigan. So it does pose a challenge for farmers. And I just wanted to briefly present some of our economic data. We published this in the teens, and this is based on the results from a 1,500 grower survey that we distributed to growers in these states, California, Michigan, New York, Oregon, and Washington, which grow a lot of these crops. These specifically are from blueberries, but the things that I really want you to pay attention to are the current estimate of loss to birds was, as you can see, in California, 4% up to 18% in Oregon. So farmers really see this as a big issue. And then we also asked them, if you didn't do any pest management for birds, what would your estimate be of your damage loss, of your loss or damage? And you can see it really increases dramatically here from 35% to 68%. We also asked if neither you nor your neighbors did any bird management, what would your losses be like? And you can see they increase even more. So the point here is that 2 points I'll make really is that we do see birds as a big issue for fruit production, but also that your management efforts with regard to pest birds really pay off and can save you quite a bit of money. Okay, so all in all, fruit producers in these 5 states estimated the annual cost of pest birds, which are, just birds that we don't want in particular places, in 5 fruit crops was nearly $200 million. Okay, so there's a lot of bird management strategies, and we all know that the best way to manage any kind of pest is to use a number of strategies in integrated pest management. So these are some things you can use with birds. Scaring, for example, inflatable tube men, pyrotechnics. Barriers are nets, primarily, and they can be very effective. I'm going to be talking specifically about cultural management here and attracting natural predators. There are also some deterrent sprays on the market and lethal control. So just keep in mind that idea of using several tactics is often your best bet. So as in the first presentation, we'll be talking about American Kestrels, the smallest falcon in North America. And I have to give a lot of credit to Megan Shave, one of my former graduate students, and Melissa Hannay, who we'll see later, because they did a great deal of this work that I'll be presenting to you. So here is the range of the American kestrel. So you can see it's extremely widespread, and it's divided in this map into where they're breeding residents. So they're only here during the breeding season, then they leave during the non-breeding season and move further south. But then there's a large swath of the country where they're permanent residents, then some areas where they're only there in the non-breeding season. But you can see they're very widely distributed. Then, as Jeanette mentioned, there has been a long-term decline in the species, even though it's quite common still. And this map from a paper that was published in 2023 shows any area in yellow, orange, or red is an area where we've seen declines in kestrels since the 1960s. The only areas where we've seen increases are where it's in green. So you can see the species has been under pressure. Okay, what do they eat? What's really nice about the American kestrels is that they consume a wide variety of items, many of which can be crop pests. So, for example, insects and other invertebrates, we've seen them with worms, for example. They eat a number of mammals, they eat birds, and they also eat occasionally reptiles. So I'll just mention that we did much of our initial work up here in what we call cherry land in Michigan, even though cherries are grown in other parts of Michigan. But this is a lot of the cherry production up here in the lower peninsula, the northwest part of that peninsula. We started up there. Later in the presentation, I'll talk about blueberry land down here in southwestern Michigan, where many of the blueberries in the state are grown. So we received some funding from NIFA, USDA Specialty Crop Research Initiative, early, maybe 2012. And we had heard that blueberry growers in the Pacific Northwest were putting up kestrel boxes in their orchard, in their fields. And this was interesting to us because kestrels are known for eating a lot of insects and mammals, and we didn't think of them as big bird eaters. But we thought it was worth a try. So we started putting up boxes in cherry orchards in Michigan. And we put cameras outside the boxes, inside initially, but this was a big mess after a few weeks with kestrel babies in there. So we moved them outside and we got a lot of information about what kinds of prey they were bringing to their nests, to their young. So they bring lots of insect prey, many of which can be detrimental to crops. They also bring lots of mammals, voles in particular, and voles can be very damaging to, for example, young cherry trees if they girdle the tree. They also bring a number of bird prey. Not as many as mammals and insects, but they are bringing prey as we captured here. So they're eating all these different types of organisms. And so we started expanding our Kestrel nest box program in cherry orchards. And this is a site where we would put them up. So we'd often put them on the edge of fields, or we'd put these towers and boxes up if a tree was missing in the orchard. So you can see there's a field nearby, whereas Jeanette mentioned they like to hunt. They will also hunt in the orchard sometimes using the trees for perches. We typically put our boxes from 15 to 18 feet high. As Jeanette mentioned, a half mile apart. It's a good idea to keep them away from loud roads. There has been some information showing that this is detrimental to their reproductive success. And again, facing the southeast, at least in northern areas, is a good idea. Okay, so we put up these boxes in orchards in northern Michigan. And this was the best project I ever done from the perspective of success. So we put up 8 boxes the first year. We had 8 boxes occupied. They all had eggs. They all fledged young. So this was terrific. And we've expanded the number of boxes over the years. We continue to see very high occupancy. So for example, this year in 2025, I think 19 out of 20 of our boxes were occupied. So this was great. And we wanted to look at whether they were actually having a measurable effect on pest birds or frugivorous birds, we'll say. And so Megan, who I introduced to you previously, in multiple orchards, some with active kestrel nesting attempts, some without, she walked these transects, counting the numbers of fruit-eating birds in the orchards. So essentially doing a comparison. If there's kestrels in your orchards, how many fruit-eating birds do you have versus not? Okay, this graph shows the orange colored bars here are the orchards without kestrel nesting attempts taking place, and the blue bars are where they are taking place. And what you can see, we have 2 crops here in the results. These are sweet cherries, our results from sweet cherries, and these are results from tart cherries. And in both cases, on this axis, you have medium-sized frugivorous birds. When you had kestrels in the orchards, you had many fewer, significantly fewer fruit-eating birds compared to when there were orchards without kestrels. So this is showing that even if they're not eating a lot of birds, they are, it seems like, scaring them away and keeping them out of the orchards. Okay, I do want to also touch on another potential benefit of having natural predators, and that is with that another of our colleagues, Phil Howard Chiacco, and his grad student, Zach Hernstead, they did some work with fruit consumers. And they did a lot of surveys and they did some choice experiments to find out what kinds of bird management techniques were most desirable from a fruit consumer's point of view. And what they found, I'll show in this graph here. So what this graph is showing is fruit consumers' willingness to pay compared to a reference condition of fruit that are produced with a bird management technique of shooting a few birds, and hopefully that scares away the rest of them. So that's our reference bird management technique. And what you can see when consumers were asked about apples or grapes produced with that reference technique or with techniques that they perceive to be more natural. So for example, putting up nest boxes for natural predators like kestrels or falconry, which is used in some parts of the country, they were very favorably disposed to these and were willing to pay more for fruit produced with these techniques compared to that reference technique. Now, they were not at all enthusiastic about the deterrent sprays that often use an ingredient called methylantranolate. And I will also point out that their preference for these things like predator nest boxes was equivalent to their preference for fruit of local origin compared to fruit from non-local origins. So this is a really interesting finding, and it suggests that you can, if you're using these types of techniques, putting up boxes for natural predators, you should let your consumers know about it. You should put it on your website. You should maybe have flyers that are available with where you sell your fruit, because consumers view this favorably. So for example, out in California, a lot of growers put up nest boxes for barn owls. We don't have hardly any barn owls in the upper Midwest, but there they use barn owls and can attract them, and they eat lots of pest mammals. So it's also helpful, of course, to have a very concise term people can remember. So something like falcon friendly or American kestrel habitat will help you get your point across. Okay, so given the great success we had up here in Cherryland, we thought, well, we've got to try this down in Blueberry Land. So we got some more funding from the National Science Foundation, and we repeated the project down in blueberry fields in southwestern Michigan. And so my grad students and I, we put together these towers again. We bought some boxes. We transported these towers. We thought it was a good sign. We had sandhill cranes on our van that we used. And then we put up these boxes. Here we are in blueberry fields, away from the cherry fields that we initially worked in. So we had some success down in blueberry fields, but it wasn't nearly the success we had up in sweet cherry orchards. And so I'm going to talk about, there's just a couple of columns I want you to pay attention to here. So this is comparing in our blueberry study region what happened compared to in our sweet cherry study region. And here's the years from the blueberry work, 2016 through 2018, and 3 years from our sweet cherry region, 2013 through 2015. As I mentioned, we're still continuing with some monitoring. But here's the big takeaway. When you look at the percent of boxes that were occupied by kestrels in blueberry land, it's only about a third, ranging from about 29% to 30%. Over here in sweet cherry land, it was nearly 100% some years, and often it was 90%. And that's still continued up to this day. So for some reason, the sweet cherry region in northern Michigan is a terrific area for kestrels. And I have, there is data from other parts of the United States and Canada. Some work from Ontario shows, lower rates of occupancy than we're seeing in the sweet cherry region, maybe higher than these here, but more in the 40 to 50% box occupancy. And so this is a very important point, is that occupancy is going to vary geographically to quite a degree. So if you're interested in doing this, it is important to spend a year or two, as Jeanette suggested, seeing what kinds of occupancy you can get from your kestrels, because as she also mentioned, starlings are a big problem in our blueberry region. And so I'm not quite sure why there's such a difference, but the starlings seem to start nesting very early in our blueberry region. They use a lot of the boxes. And though we have seen kestrels take out starlings, it may be a deterrent that the starlings are already in those boxes. So if you're in an area where you're going to get a lot of starling activity in your boxes, you're going to have to put some time into managing these starlings. You can take the nests out. They're not a native species, so that's okay. But, you're going to have to weigh the costs and benefits. Starlings, we don't have to worry about up in northern Michigan and southwestern Michigan. They're a big issue. Okay, so the tasks associated with maintaining nest boxes, really, there's only one, and that's that after the nesting season, the box has to be emptied out of the old wood shavings, the old nesting material, and they can be quite messy, no doubt about that. And then relined with new wood shavings or animal bedding. And then that's really the only task to keep these boxes going. All right, one important point is that kestrels and rodenticides do not mix. So you never want to be using rodenticides if you have kestrels in the area or they're likely to be in the area. So some take-home points here. One thing I didn't mention, but I'll mention now, is that kestrels are most effective for deterring pest birds from fruit when the crop ripening period overlaps their nesting period, which is typically that May, June, maybe into July. So that overlaps perfectly with sweet cherries in Michigan and a lot of varieties of blueberries. It doesn't overlap with when grapes are being harvested, for example. So while kestrels nesting in vineyards early in the season will give you some benefits because they're taking out pests, it won't be the pests that are eating the fruit. It will be the pests that are, for example, eating the leaves. Potential benefits of kestrels include reduced pests, as we've seen, bird pests, potential marketing opportunities, and also conserving a declining species. A big point that I'll mention again, kestrel nest box occupancy varies a lot from place to place, and starling management may be necessary if you install boxes in areas with many starlings. You need to clean the boxes yearly, and of course, multiple management strategies to manage birds are going to increase your success in deterring them. Many, many researchers have been involved in our research over the years with nest boxes. This is a list of many of them from across the country. And I do want to acknowledge our funding sources and the many growers in the northern United States that have helped us with this work. Okay, and then I think it's time for the poll questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Sure.
All right, there's our poll questions. Please fill those out and then be thinking of any questions you have for either of our speakers and put those in the chat. Okay, I think we're at about 80% participating, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And can you review the results with us, Catherine?
Sure. So one potential benefit to fruit farmers of installing nest boxes for American kestrels is reducing pest populations, either through consumption by the kestrels or potentially scaring them, creating what we call a landscape of fear. A couple of other options that I didn't include here, but we mentioned were that there's potential marketing benefits to attracting kestrels, and also you're helping a declining species. Now, for the second point, I'm really glad people are so aware of this, but they do eat lots of different types of organisms. So they eat mammals, they eat insects, they eat birds, and they also eat some other invertebrates and reptiles occasionally. So a number of these species within these different groups can be pests to crops, and so they can be beneficial to farmers. Nice job.
All right, I'm going to give us a few minutes to think of some questions. All right, looks like we've got one coming in from Marty. How many nesting attempts do kestrels typically do? Should a clean out occur between these events? Oh, so how many broods, I guess, in a season?
I mean, I can mention that, and then Jeanette can, if you have anything else you want to add. So in northern Michigan, we typically find they do one nesting attempt if they're successful. I mean, if they fail pretty early on in their nesting attempt, they may attempt another one then. But I don't think we've ever had a situation where we've had two successful nesting attempts in a row, and it could be because the season is pretty short up there. And I don't think you need to worry about a clean out in between because often it's the same pair and they haven't gotten too far along. And so I wouldn't worry about cleaning it out. I just leave them alone to try and try again if they want.
Yeah, I agree. And we have only ever had one nest attempt. I do know, I believe it was not this summer, but last summer. There's a consortium of kestrel monitors in this region. And I believe one of the organizations in the La Crosse area said they had a kestrel that nested twice and had two successful nests. And that's the only time I am aware of that happening.
All right. For annual maintenance of high up boxes, is there a technique beyond just climbing up a ladder?
Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. So what we did is we used this tower system that we read about somewhere. And so our boxes, those towers are kind of on have a big hinge that we can take down so we don't have to climb up a ladder. But that is an issue if you don't have some system like that. I know someone has been experimenting with putting the box on like a little track that goes up the tower, and so you could raise and lower the box that way. But yeah, if you don't have something like that, you have to use a ladder, I would think. Jeanette, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, and ours are not on that hinge method, so all of ours you do have to climb a ladder. I know I have seen people back a pickup if it's an area where they can back a pickup truck to it and then use a shorter ladder if they don't have, a 12-foot ladder or 15-foot ladder is heavy and can be unwieldy. So sometimes I've seen people put a smaller ladder in the back of a pickup, which, may or may not be considered safe. I do know for monitoring, we have that has evolved through the years as well. And from the little mirror that you can attach to a telescoping pole to peek into a nest box to monitor it, or in more recent years, you can get, I mean, they're called peeping cameras or cameras that sometimes in automobile maintenance they will use to look under vehicles. And we attach that tiny little peeping camera onto a pool pole that you would use for cleaning out a pool. And it's a long telescoping pole, and you can connect it through an app to your cell phone and use that to look into the Kestrel box for monitoring. And that whole setup now we can make them for $50 or less. So we use that for monitoring, but for the cleaning purpose, yeah, it's kind of a tough one.
All right. Do you see this model as useful in other cropping systems like row crops with corn and soybeans, or is your guys' experience primarily with fruit?
I mean, my experience has been with fruit, but that's because we specifically asked for funding to work in fruit. And I think there is some potential in other systems, though they do need to have space to hunt. So, if a crop is completely covering a landscape, like I'm thinking of soybeans, if they would get down in there at all, if there's not some grassy areas nearby. So I think potentially it could be, useful, but I haven't specifically worked in those systems.
Okay. Brenna, it looks like you had a question you wanted to unmute. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So, hey, Jeanette. So I was wondering if either of you have had experience with trying raptor perches as a way to support pest management on open landscapes. So I'm thinking we have a sheep rancher in southwestern Wisconsin who grew up in Switzerland, and he came to us with this idea of trying raptor perches because he has open pastures, lots of pests, and no place for raptors to sit and perch while they hunt. And so he's wondering if that might increase the chances of successful pest management. Do you have any experience or thoughts on that?
Are you talking about like raptor perches being the perches on top of power poles?
Well, not necessarily a power pole, but like some kind of pole or post that's relatively tall,
Okay.
8 or so feet, with like a crossbar on top.
I can mention, so my graduate student, Megan, she also put up perches in addition to nest boxes. And in her analysis, she did not find significant effects of having the perches that kestrels could use, on the number of fruit-eating birds. And then I had another undergraduate work, and we put up perches again, and we put up cameras on them so we could see who was using them. And we did get some raptors on the perches. We did get some kestrels on the perches, but we also got things like cedar waxwings, which are a big fruit-eating bird, using the perches. So, to date, we haven't found good evidence that they're a real benefit beyond the nest boxes, I would say. And there is this possibility that you're also going to get at some of those fruit-eating birds that you don't want using the perches as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just Brenna, while you're on, Brenna is from Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, whose protocol I had mentioned. Don't you have a different style of box that some of your monitors or you have put up as far as elevating for cleaning?
Yeah, so similar to what the other speaker had mentioned with having them on a hinge, all of our nest boxes are on 8 foot posts that connect to another 8 foot post that are buried. And so those two posts, the top one hinges down so that you can clean out the nest box without being up on a ladder. So that's a required uh, thing for all of our nest boxes now for safety, volunteer safety.
Okay. Is that on your website?
Yeah, the construction plans are on our website. I can put a link in the chat if you want. I don't mean to like steal the show or anything.
I brought you into it, so.
Okay, I can put a link to the construction plans, which has that information about the posts and the hinging.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have a question about what are some of the reasons that a nesting attempt would be unsuccessful?
I think what we see with nesting attempts that fail is non-natives, starlings. That tends to be the biggest issue we've had, and the reason why we end up moving nest boxes. Predators and the I have this thought, and I don't know if you've experienced it all in Michigan, but I do wonder if tree swallows do they are very aggressive, and there are some areas where we have a lot of tree swallows that end up taking over the boxes, and tree swallows are a native species. But I wonder sometimes if the tree swallows actually are aggressive enough to kick out the kestrels, because we will have areas where we have kestrels and then the next that are starting to nest, and the next time we come back a tree swallow will have taken over the box. But in general, it is the biggest reason we see where they've started a nest attempt and then they're not there. And when we can determine a reason, it's usually due to starlings or predators. Otherwise, it's often unknown.
Yeah, sometimes it's unknown. As I mentioned, in northern Michigan, we have very few failures, so that's really nice. But when we do have a failure, I think predation is often what happens is it looks like one of the parents stopped showing up at the box. And so we're assuming that they were preyed upon by something. And I will mention that one potential reason people think kestrels may have declined is that Cooper's hawks, which actually prey on them, have been increasing in some parts of the country. So they prey on kestrels. So it's possible that they are one of the predators that preys on kestrels, and so prevents both parents from making it through the nesting cycle. And so when it's down to one parent, it's really hard for them to raise the young.
And I actually witnessed a Cooper's hawk take a male out of the air one time. A male and female kestrel, a pair were in an area, and I saw a Cooper's hawk take the male out of the air and carry it away. I was very unhappy.
Well, that feeds into our next question, which is about the known and or theoretical causes of kestrel decline. And we did have someone answer broad spectrum pesticides, habitat loss, ecological traps, which are all good answers. And then you mentioned Cooper's hawk just now. I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
It is a really tricky one because, in some parts of the country, yeah, there has been habitat loss. There's been this regrowth since the 1800s of a lot of areas that used to be kind of open pasture. But I think those are some of the primary ones right there, along with potentially Cooper's hawks.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Similar to the Cooper's hawks hunting kestrels, is there any concern about kestrels hunting other native birds that we're trying to help? Or is this not an issue that people need to worry about?
I mean, they will take bluebirds. I mean, and we once had a situation of a kestrel reaching into a bluebird box, to pull out some young. You know, so there is those things that happen. I guess, you know, I would weigh the costs and benefits in those situations and see whether the loss of a bluebird or so is okay, given that you're trying to increase kestrels or help them use them in pest management. But yeah, those kinds of things can happen.
And those are situations that are already happening naturally. Those are naturally occurring events already. We know that, and we know that kestrels do take some amount of birds. I would just say that if you know that you have a threatened or endangered species in the area, maybe that's not the best place to put up a kestrel box.
And then it looks like we had a response going back to the raptor perches, someone saying that they have seen raptor perches in western landscapes for prairie dog control. These were repurposed power poles installed in open range, but those are targeting like larger raptors, not necessarily kestrels. So um, that's
Yeah,
good.
and I think purchase can be a good idea. It's just we didn't have the evidence yet to say this is definitively a benefit. But yeah, I mean, if you can, if they're targeting larger raptors and not necessarily attractive to small species, yeah, that might work.
Right. And then it looks like Brenna shared the construction plans that they have for nest boxes. We will share with all the attendees today a link to a resources page, which has some resources that Catherine and Jeanette shared. I'll add this nest box plan to that as well. So make sure to check out the resources page at the end. Um, I don't see any other. Oh, wait, looks like we have one more question. I'll just quickly say we've got a link here for the evaluation. We would love your help providing feedback so we can continually improve. I will do one more question here, though, while people are getting that link up. Um, do you know if avian influenza has been detected in kestrels?
Mm.
I don't know that. No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, not that I've heard of it all.
Right.
We do take cautions when we're monitoring our nest boxes to make sure to clean all of our equipment in between. And if there's any concern, if we find a dead nest box of young or something like that, to make sure to bag up all the materials and dispose of it. But I have not heard of influenza being found in kestrels at all.
Okay. All right, we're a couple minutes early, but I will leave this link up for people to grab and to get over to the evaluation. But thanks again to Jeanette and Catherine for sharing your knowledge today. Thanks everyone for attending. This Roll of Birds on Midwest Farms webinar series is part of a professional development grant from North Central Region of SARE. So thanks to SARE for making this possible. If you need CE credits through CCA credits, please uh, take that link over to the evaluation and give us your license number so we can submit those. And then again, I'll be sharing some additional resources and research papers and some links in a follow-up email. So stay tuned for that. We hope to see you at our next webinar on November 4th. Thank you everyone for attending.